Hi, everybody. Welcome to podcast number 150. I'm Susan Clinton, one of your co-hosts for Tough to Treat. I wanted to just thank everybody for joining our website and coming in and seeing what we have. We've got some cool search features for different things so that you don't have to sift through 150 podcasts to find stuff. So feel free to come in and do it and join the fun. We got a couple of exciting announcements coming up later in the spring, so stay tuned with us. And if you're not already a member of our newsletter, that's the best way to do it, is to go into our website, www.toughtotreat.com, and sign up for our newsletter. That's where you get the latest and best information about the podcasts that are being released and or any other things that Erica and I are up to. So enjoy the podcast. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to podcast number 150. I'm Susan Clinton, your co-host, and I'm here with my wonderful partner, Erica. How are you?
I'm good, Susan. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. We're kind of in the middle of February, and I'm not sure what the weather is where you are, Erica, but we're still in the teens or lower with a big snowstorm headed again tomorrow.
So jealous. We're like in the 50s here. I can't take it. I need snow.
You'll have to come visit next winter.
I know. I really miss it.
Hang out.
I will.
Plenty of it for everybody.
I know.
Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit today about, it's something that we've discussed in many of our podcasts, but it's not so much the story of a hypermobile female, but what do we do when we have somebody who's a bit hypermobile and they have a very stiff mid to lower thorax? So, because remember, people who have extra movement tend to have to seek stability other places. Oftentimes we'll see over-recruiting hamstrings, over-recruiting feet, forward head, shortened neck, different things that you'll see in, this population. And I know I've talked a lot about this in dancers before, but this particular client that I wanted to talk about is one that I had a while ago. And it was a very interesting client. I did it with a couple of other people. We all in academia, we all agreed to take a look at her because, it was just a friend and they were at a loss of what to do. This person is a female who is in her early 30s. And she was an archer and wanted to, I know, right? We don't usually talk about stuff like this, but I just thought in light of the whole, how do you get the thorax moving when you've got shoulder blades that are hypermobile, shoulder girdles that are hypermobile, a system that's a bit hypermobile. And she was attracted to this sport early on. She's always been a horseback rider and outdoorsy type person and big, comes from a family of bow hunters. She doesn't really interested in bow hunting, but she was certainly interested in becoming an archer, target, and really liked it and has the fancy equipment and all the stuff. And,
it's a lovely sport.
Yeah. Just really, the equipment alone was just worth doing the assessment with, and, some of the treatment because, just complicated. But anyway, one of the things that was happening, here's what she was told. She was told that her drawback was weak. She was told that her right shoulder is too low, that her right shoulder was unstable, and that her neck is too stiff. This is what she's been told over and over and over again, when people and coaches and different people have tried to work with her. She had one coach that was probably the best, that taught her how to focus, taught her how to breathe, taught her how to center herself and do the thing, because you have to kind of slow your breath way down. So you're kind of in the zone for these types of things, for this marksmanship type of work. And this particular person said, I'm not sure what's going on with your body, but if you could find somebody to help you with that part, you'd probably be an outstanding archer. So anyway, she'd kind of, tripped through the years, doing things and stuff. But anyway, it was interesting because the pictures in the video she sent us were all shot from behind. Everything was shot from behind. So you could see this drawback with this shoulder that goes up in the air. The whole shoulder girdle would go up in the air, and then it would go
Yeah.
back into full retraction with full
Yeah.
winging,
Yes.
complete winging of the scapula.
I've done archery, and that she's right-handed, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
That is not an easy
No, it's not
sport.
an easy
Yeah.
sport at all. Anyway, but I thought it was interesting because they only filmed
Huh.
her from behind.
Yes.
So everybody's been looking at her from one direction. So I kind of asked her, I said, did anybody ever look at you from the side or the front? And she was like, well, people look at me from the side all the time. Did they ever film you? No. So she had her equipment, obviously. And so we just, the way that I always work is show me. Let me just see what's going on. But it was interesting because when we looked at her from the side and then from the front, one of the things that didn't show up in the back was as she began to pull back, she actually had a jutting of her lower ribs forward.
Like an anterior translation almost.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And kind of a rib flare.
Yeah.
And that was where she was in my opinion, that's where she was trying to get her stability from.
Yes.
Because she couldn't get it anywhere else. So she did that. And so she would get this like really kind of, tucking under, if you will, of the thorax down there. And really quite interesting. And also because of the position she was in, there was a lot of right side bending of the head and left rotation to see the target. So I was kind of looking above and below. What are the feet doing? What's happening? I was going to say
the feet. Yes, a narrow base of support archery. Yeah.
And so and the feet were okay. She was healthy. Strong person. She just she just didn't have the motor control that we would think somebody should have to do this. So there's the first thing is like, if what she was doing was bad, I don't know, but her thing was she wanted more power. She wanted more accuracy and more power. And so, and her neck bothered her a lot. Especially if she spent a long time, working. And that would make sense because the top of her head was always in that upper cervical, right side bending, left rotation. So you got a little bit of upper cervical stuff going on. And that goes in with the eye gaze and centering yourself and balance, the whole piece. My thoughts were, when I was looking at this, is like, okay, she's using either the thorax was stiff to begin with and she just knew how, her brain just figured out how to leverage that, or it became stiff over time to balance what she was doing with all of this stuff.
Yeah. Did she feel stiff, Susan, or did she
I hadn't had my hands on her yet. So.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I mean, did she say she was stiff? Like, did
she
feel?
No.
Okay, got it.
No, she said her neck was stiff. Her neck is always stiff.
Yeah, got it.
Her neck is too stiff. I can't loosen my neck up. And it's like, well, it's kind of becoming this part that's squished in between here, with what's happening with the thorax and the upper cervical area. The neck was a smaller consequence to me at the moment because I thought, well, if what we do changes her neck pain, then that's great. Or changes the thought of stiffness, but let's just see what can happen. So I'm thinking about the upper cervical, I'm thinking about eye gaze, and I'm thinking about that maybe that eye gaze has become a bit fixed over time. Because, when you hone in on it so much, do you ever really let that go? Yes, certainly she could turn her eyes in all directions and everything, but did she use that as a, did she have that variability in her regular everyday movements? Or did it kind of stay kind of narrowed because she was so, her sport requires that.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was, for her, it was a lifestyle. It wasn't just a sport. She really wanted to do this and spent a great deal of time. I mean, this is like, her thing. And then, so the other thing is that she can quiet her breath, around activity, which, she knows how to, she can bring herself in. So it wasn't like a mental lapse. It wasn't like I get anxious and start breathing funny. None of that was a piece of this, which was, because she had worked really hard on that part. But, so, kind of thinking about that, then it's kind of like time to put your hands on the thorax and see what can happen here. And her thorax was stiff, when you get a hold of the rib cage, and you could just feel the stiffness in there. If you laid her, if we did lay her down and do some, P to A glides, and definitely mid thorax to lower thorax was, quite stiff. And so you can, so the question becomes here, what do you do? Do you mobilize the rib cage? What do you do? What are your thoughts here as you're kind of like seeing this picture where you would like to go? Because I know you have some thoughts about this too.
Yeah, she reminds me of my equestrian I'm treating, where they're just scapular bracing. They're like, the
Mm-hmm.
interior, the hinge, because it's a rotational sport,
Yeah.
a lot of times, from what I've seen, at least in my patients, especially with that anterior hinge and any kind of upper extremity, unilateral movement, it's more of like, what's creating that stiffness? Is it joint stiffness? In my experience, probably not. It's more
Mm-hmm.
like an overactivity or a poor neuromuscular balance surrounding the thoracic cage, like bilateral, erectors, or like an oblique that sort of, depending on where she was, because artery's narrow, right? And she probably adapted well and was fairly centered. But when you're taking that into that rotation, a lot of these people, depending on what their drivers is, they dump that scapula, the rhomboids, they get all very, she didn't say she was stiff, but you feel like there's stiffness there, when in essence, it's a stiffness created by muscles versus a joint stiffness.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the overlying nervous system,
right,
recruiting or
the
trying to
nervous
balance
system,
in somewhere.
exactly. The nervous system's going to turn on muscles that need to get turned on when you're doing something like that. And especially with her strategy, the nervous system has a reference for center, and that is certainly in an anterior translation, right? And I bet you when you saw her from the side, you could probably see that even more, right? And so that's not optimal when you're when you're an archer.
Yeah, and she didn't, but she could never really get it figured out. So one of the things that I did was I started thinking, okay, so she has been given shoulder girdle strengthening exercises till the cows come home. And, she can bench press, she can do a bent row, she can do some of this stuff. That's not the issue. The issue is not a strength issue. The issue is a control issue. And what she needed to learn how to control from a reverse engineering point. So instead of trying to increase thoracic mobility and decrease shoulder girdle mobility, I went at it a different way. I thought, let's start getting some shoulder stabilization positions in and get the thorax to move on that instead. So we started, laying down and sitting up and standing up, and what did her breathing look like? And could you take a deep breath in, and what did we see? And a lot of belly breathing, not a lot of chest, not a lot of pump handle and bucket handle movement of the rib cage, which didn't surprise me too much because the ribs are kind of flared up. And like you said, that anterior translation, that happens there. So we spent some time because I wanted to see how to get the thorax moving on the shoulder girdle. So I decided that I was going to start her in isometrics, thoracic scapular, work. And we did standing with hands forward on the wall. And she's done this before, right? She's done it before where she puts her hands on the wall and she's supposed to squeeze her shoulder blades together and she's supposed to protract them. But when she does that, it's all shoulder blade moving and the thorax doesn't move. So we decided to do something different. We decided to get the hands on the wall, have her just kind of like lean in, turn the muscles on. And all we did there was just add breath. And put my hands on her lower ribs and wanted her to kind of fill up my hands with the breath while she held everything still, with her hands forward on the wall. And then we, switched it. We could do it at different places. We put the hands on the countertop and did a kind of almost a little like a 20-degree plank, onto a countertop. So it wasn't much, but enough to get good work into the shoulder girdle position without retracting and breathing instead. And then we did some work where she could put her hands, standing, put her hands down on a surface where she's at 90 degrees of elbow and her hands are flat on the surface like a table. and press down there, watch what's happening at the scapula. She could do that. But then what we did was we added breath. So I'd have her take a deep breath so we could get the pectoralis muscle to start doing the pump handle type of movement. So my goal was she had to breathe, she had to slow her breathing down, but she's using her thorax in such a way that she can't breathe with her ribs aren't moving for breath, so she's having to do it with her belly and with this kind of like, thoracic kind of gliding forward and back.
Yeah, it's an inefficient position.
Yeah. So, obviously the standing position was meaningful, but we had to get this going, in a number of different positions. So once we got that happening and she could get that pretty good and she practiced it and stuff, then we put the bow in her hand. But we also put some TheraBand around where the bowstring was. We put some TheraBand on there. So all she would have to hold the bow. So we wanted to make it meaningful, right? So she'd have to hold the bow, and then she would, with her right hand start to draw, with the arrow and, the finger draw it back, but she was using the TheraBand. So there was minimal resistance. And we did that in different places, like in the beginning, take a deep breath, bring it to here. Now set and take a deep breath. So we did it in various positions of that so that she could really begin to challenge her system in a different way. And then, so as she got better with just doing the positions and stuff, I decided that it was time to challenge her whole body. So rather than going to a stronger TheraBand, which we will, obviously we're going to progress to where we're actually going to go to a very lightly tied bowstring back to the stiffness that she wants to be able to work at. But you can kind of see the progression there. But what I did, which I thought was fun because it is a narrow base, and what I was trying to do was figure out how to get her to actually use her abs lightly to stabilize herself rather than shoving her thorax forward. So as we were kind of working and standing with the TheraBand, I'd have her like exhale and just bring her belly in a little bit, so that she could begin to get that. But she had so many, I wanted to get her off her feet. I wanted to challenge that specific core system a little bit more. So I actually got her in tall kneeling and half kneeling to work on this.
I love that. I was just going to, you're right up my alley. You're thinking like I would be thinking.
It's like, I wonder what happens if we take away some of the whole lower extremity stuff and things like that. And it was very challenging for her, but it was also really good because it made her have to use other muscles. And actually the ones that she ended up using a lot were like her hips, her abductors, to stabilize her pelvis, but it just automatically helped her abdominal kick in. Because if she tried to shoot her thorax forward in that position, she'd fall over.
And the nervous system in that position just, it changes recruitment pattern, right? When you change the position, right? And that's fantastic. I have a patient now I'm treating similarly, and that's what I would do. I would go right into kneeling. So go ahead, keep going. I'm curious.
Yeah. So we even did it in the seated position.
Yeah.
When she couldn't handle it and tall kneeling or half kneeling, it was like, just sit down then.
So interesting.
And that was still because she was trying to through her pelvis, trying to pull back. And it was like, this stays still, only this, just really breaking down the motion. And I know that it's supposed to be a full motion in a circle. And sometimes motor control people say, don't break it down. But she needed to feel this in a bunch of different ways. I was trying to increase her experiential piece rather than just make this a linear type of exercise, because she'd had those. She's had those her whole life, and none of it changed the pattern. So it was like, okay, I'm after pattern here. So the other thing that we did, and as she was struggling and sitting and half kneeling and kneeling, was I started getting her to mobilize her own upper cervical spine. So the kind of the mulligan approach, where you take a strap or a towel and you just hold that towel where it wraps around C2. And all I had her do was side bend left and turn to the right. The opposite of what she did. That's all we did. She just did that, threw that in as an exercise. That's part of your warm up. Just do it. But, and then I gave her, of course, we started working with the Clock Yourself app with eyes on the wall, doing all the different eye gaze stuff faster, quicker, to just bring that variance back in and reconnect, different gazes with different, proprioceptors in the upper cervical spine and the vestibular system, just to kind of reconnect that ocular
Yeah.
reflex pattern there.
So
And
no, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, so in kneeling, what were you doing in kneeling again? Were you doing TheraBand, like like what I would do is protraction, like some protraction, eccentric retraction. I would do things like arm stuff. Is that what you were doing in kneeling?
We did some of that. We did a lot of the bow work.
But most of the bow work. Got it.
But that's a great idea, and it's probably something that I missed. Was we could have done with the TheraBand around the wrists, kind of pulling out, like almost in Tai Chi we'd call it gi, which is like outward, like a shield.
Yes.
It would be kind of that type of motion I would see now that could really help bring that in. Is like, because you're working with a sword, it is kind of like, kind of fits into that, that how can I brace myself outward to do this rather than trying to do something inward. Those would be really good exercises to do. We did do the balls under the arms to play around with, away from arching, just because it was fun and something easy to do. Here, stick this up in your armpit and watch a little TV, stuff like that. And then as we kind of got her to where she could be stable on tall, she was better in half kneeling than tall kneeling. Tall kneeling was the most challenging, and I think it would be for a lot of people to try to do that. But as we got her to where she could really actually, control and go through the motion and not feel like she was going to fall over all the time and all of the things. And the exhale breath really helped with that, as she was pulling back to be exhaling. That just drew the abdomen enough to kind of allow, and then then she could take a deep breath in, and her abs were already engaged a bit, so we got the chest moving a little bit better for her. And then we just worked on kind of getting her onto a stiffer bowstring, as she kind of went forward. It took a while. I will tell you this was somebody that there wasn't any such thing as telehealth at the time. We got the information on her and the videos on her before we saw her. We were able to see her about once a month, once every 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's hard.
Because it just, it was part of where we were and where she was and what was going on. We did send videos back and forth, because it was helpful, to kind of watch and give her cues in and stuff like that. But it took about a year.
I would imagine.
When people think about this is not a 2-week go see me and be solved type of thing. This is something that's going to take time to, that pattern is very, very, very ingrained in there.
Just going to say that.
And you can't take it away, because then she's completely without, you're just like pulling the rug out from underneath somebody. You got to just change the shoes you're standing on the rug in, a little bit, and and help her. She could mobilize a little bit. She had her breathing exercise to do. These things she did away from the the ring, and then when she was back in the thing, she just I never told her to try to do these things while you're doing that. Just do these things outside. Eventually it'll start to change on the inside. That's why we went to the bow and arrow probably a little bit before we should have. Thinking about some of the stuff you were talking about, giving her a few more exercises to do in those positions to gain trust for her system that she's not going to fall over. But I did that on purpose, because as soon as we got the bow and arrow in there, we could start. The changes would start happening, because what she was working on was meaningful to what she was doing. But it wasn't like she needed to do it like you have always done it this way, now you're going to do it this way. That wasn't going to work.
No.
So we allowed her to adapt to the new stuff. And to make the changes.
And she probably, that movement pattern probably carried over throughout, other activities and things as well. And it's the brain, what does it say? Practice makes permanent, not perfect, right? And so you have to, it's like mass practice. And that's, when you got someone coming
choices.
in. Yes, exactly. And you got someone coming, once every 6 weeks. That's hard. That's hard for both, and that's, but it is what it is. And you work with what you got. And, that's really, really when the patient has to do, a little bit more, I think, in terms of their commitment level, so so
anyway, there we are.
There you are. That's perfect.
Just kind of, but I want to, the the reason that I brought it up is that I know we've talked about this type of thing with people that are, easy movers, whether they're hypermobile or not, they're,
Mm-hmm.
the lanky, generally easy movers, your Gumby style versus your fire
Mm-hmm.
hydrant style people. And, we see this a lot with people in different things that they're doing. And, that trunk becomes the anchor, and the thorax especially, and really being able to get that thorax more mobile and get it, working more meaningful, and not just
Mm-hmm.
something everything else is pulling off of or pulling onto, can be
Mm-hmm.
really challenging because they can cheat through all the exercises. You have them put their hands on the wall and you tell them to protract, and their trunk doesn't move. The shoulder girdle moves around the trunk, which is fine. That's okay. You can push a door open, but
Mm-hmm.
the problem is that, as soon as the trunk is staying very static and very still, and everything's moving around the thorax, and it needs to be part of the movement. And so
Mm-hmm.
figuring out how to get the thorax to come into play, my choice in this particular case, and has been with a lot of other clients that I work with, is using breath and using it to restore bucket handle and pump handle movements, which are a key
Mm-hmm.
piece of what our
Mm-hmm.
thorax should do. Does she need it to ventilate for her sport? No, but she did need it to help her thorax get into a better position,
Mm-hmm.
so that the work between the shoulder girdle and the thorax would be much more dynamic and not
Yeah.
one-sided.
Yeah.
That was the theory
Yeah.
I went off of.
Yeah, I know. And I think also, I think the shorty that I did last week, and then the one that we did together on impairments, where we talked about getting patient into like a bit of a posterior tilt and moving them.
Mm-hmm.
That's another option for it depends on the patient, right?
Mm-hmm.
That your patient here has gotten, like, she's done all that, she's like been everywhere. And so I talked about in the shorty where I had this equestrian I'm treating, she still needs a reference for center. So what I did is I put a half foam roller under her on the reformer as she was moving. So that would be last week, episode 149. Her thorax needs a reference for center, and it's in the body, and the brain has to figure that out. So changing the input, like you put your patient into kneeling. I did that as well with my patient. Putting her, on a half foam roller while on a Pilates reformer, that really, you really got to find center, right? Going on a Bosu ball. So at this point in the clinical reasoning, there's an advanced clinical reasoning. It's not like about choosing what exercise. It's really choosing what environment and what's the current impairment. What does she need now? Not 5
Right.
years ago or 4
Yeah.
years ago, but
Yeah.
now. And that's where the clinical reasoning comes in. And I love it. I love that's time I did archery. I have to say, as an aside, I was in Ireland and we did it in the pouring rain in Mayo, and we came back here, and there's a couple of places in Brooklyn, and I was like almost addicted. But I have like a shoulder issue myself, and I'm like, I found myself pulling the bow back, and I was like, oh, and it's very easy to get into that sort of rigidity that you feel in the scapula, right? But it's a great sport, and
Mm-hmm.
I would, it's always fun to treat people like that, I have to say. So very nice. Awesome. Well, everybody, we hope you enjoyed the episode.
Yep. And we'll see you
We'll see you
as we move forward.
forward.
Thanks
Enjoy.
for supporting us through 150 episodes of
Yay.
Tough to Treat. All right. Bye, everyone.